What's up, guys? Laura Sanko here. Thank you so much for joining me on my YouTube channel. As always, I appreciate it. If you guys can click like, hit the subscribe button, tell your friends, tell your family, tell just people in general, trying really hard to grow the channel this year and make it a little bit more at the forefront of what I'm doing. So wanted to do a quick video on some of the judging that we saw at UFC 297. I'm going to keep this fast. So I'm probably not going to touch on everything that I could because, quite frankly, there were a lot of points in terms of officiating and judging that could be dug into. And Lord knows I love to get in the weeds. But just to keep this one quick, I want to talk about this idea of visible damage and what it does and does not mean in terms of the scoring criteria. There are a few fights at UFC 297 that this would apply to. Some of the fights earlier on the prelims were affected by a lot of blood. But in particular, the main event, there was also some moments where people were referencing visible damage, and I thought the commentary booth did a good job of sort of helping clarify, what that does and doesn't mean in terms of like, you can only judge damage that is visible in the round that it takes place in. So it's not something that is affecting the fight in perpetuity. So that's one thing to make sure that you understand as a viewer is that when you see damage, that damage, a cut, let's just call it a cut. When you see a cut, that cut can only be attributed to the strike that caused it. It's not something that, you go, if that strike happens in the first round and the guy's bloody going into the second, it's almost like you have to imagine the fighter as having a completely fresh face going into the later rounds. You're not allowed to look at that cut and have it influence how you see the round that you are then scoring. They're each judged individually as a clean, fresh slate. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Probably the most confusing part of visible damage is how much it does and does not score. And there's a lot of nuance here, so bear with me. I spoke, at length with a lot of people that I consider to be experts in this field, and obviously, I'm a judge. I'm a certified judge in Missouri. I won't shut up about it because I worked really hard to get that piece of paper. So that makes me, I guess, more of an expert than the average person. But there are guys that I consider to be even more so, the active judges, and in particular, Sean Sheehan. Great person to follow on Twitter. I always bounce thoughts and ideas off of him, but I've had conversations with John McCarthy. I've had conversations with UK judges. I've had conversations with American judges. So I feel like I have a really good, well-rounded thought process on this. And I will tell you that in the 4 or 5 conversations I had immediately before this video, even among the guys that I consider to be the foremost experts, they're either doing it every weekend, they're doing it, in my opinion, at the highest level, or they are simply a thought leader, like Sean, or that, maybe they were part of the crew that came up with the criteria in the first place. They all see it just slightly differently. So that's, I think, one thing to keep in mind in judging in general is that there is always going to be a bit of subjectivity because it is judging after all. This is not a black and white, you got a point, you didn't get a point. This is a sport where, like figure skating or gymnastics, we have judges that render a decision when a conclusion is not found by finish. So when it comes to visible damage, the quick answer is it is medium important, medium to little important. It's kind of a weird way to phrase it, but the example that Sean gave me, which I thought was an awesome example, and I'm just going to regurgitate it here. So thank you, Sean, for giving it to me. Imagine an elbow. Imagine an elbow lands on an opponent, and it's a good shot. We see it land. It lands with, we'll say, a small to medium amount of impact. We see the shot. Okay, there's an elbow that landed, but there's no cut, and there's no like wobble or sit down or a major wince or covering up type of reaction. It lands, we see it, it happened. Okay, so that's example number 1. Example number 2, the exact same elbow lands to the exact same opponent on the exact same part of the body with the same amount of velocity, but this time causes a cut to open up. Couple things we need to keep in mind here, okay? Does the cut immediately affect the fight? And we can say yes, or we can say no. sometimes cuts are really tiny and they're on the back of the head. And even though they bleed, or the side of the head, no one's hitting the back of the head, that's not really going to affect the fight. Is it right over here and immediately gushing blood? Is it going to affect the fighter's ability to move forward? That's something that you have to keep in mind. But again, it's not like, oh, then it automatically means this number of points. That's not how it works at all. It's just a thing that you keep in the back of your mind. On to the third one. That same elbow lands the same part of the body, the same opponent. It was thrown with the same velocity, but this time the opponent, stumbles or is put on skates or even sat down or has this really visible physical reaction to the shot. That shot is what matters. That shot matters much more than the cut, and certainly more than the shot that landed, but there was no visible effect to the fight that happened immediately after and can be attributed specifically to that shot. So hopefully that helps clarify things in terms of how important is blood, how important is swelling. It can only be attributed to the shot that causes it. It can only be attributed in the round where it was caused, and it is significantly, I use that word trepidatiously, it is less important than concussive damage. Concussive damage is what you are looking for to render a decision in a fight. Who is landing more concussive blows? So hopefully that helps clarify the cut, discussion, the visible damage discussion, because the reality is, a guy can be, imagine a guy on top in his opponent's guard, and he's been landing tons of ground and pound, but nothing cuts. And then the guy on bottom, is able to slice the guy on top open, and he's bleeding everywhere. But the blow itself was not a concussive blow. It was a slicing blow. Do you take into account the fact that he's bleeding? Yes. Does it negate all of the concussive shots that he has been receiving from the top? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And do you even think about that blood moving into the next round? No, you don't. So hopefully that helps clear up some of the discussion around visible damage. Some of the things that get really confusing with this are cumulative damage that isn't necessarily visible. So think about leg kicks. Judges can score leg kicks. So say the first round, a guy gets kicked over and over, and you can see it affecting him in the fight. You're going to give points to the guy who is landing the leg kicks, right? You can see that they're having an effect. But maybe in the second round, nothing really happens in terms of leg kicks, and it's sort of like he recovers a little bit. In the third round, if he takes another leg kick and has a massive reaction to it, the tricky thing is scoring appropriately, because technically speaking, you're not supposed to take into account the cumulative damage that happened from the strikes in the first round and how they affect that one strike in the third round. So the answer to that one is that there's not really a great answer. It's kind of a gray area. And that's where, really experienced judges kind of shine, because they know how to handle those situations. But it hopefully it opens your eyes as viewers to a lot of the nuance and just how difficult it can be to score these strikes. Never mind the fact that you're all sitting in different vantage points. Never mind the fact that this judge doesn't have a clear view, and this judge does. There are so many things that can affect the judging. But in terms of visible damage, does it score? Yes, sometimes, but only in that moment, and only in so much as it affects the fight in the immediate thereafter. Does it score as much as a blow that does not cut and does not cause swelling, but does cause a wobble or a stumble or, a knockdown? Absolutely not. Those are the strikes that are the most important in terms of determining who won a round.